It's a pleasure to be with you today and to be able to share a little bit of some of the work we did here in Lisbon. It's great to have the opportunity to participate in this international research network that Kiki and Elizabeth are coordinating. So it's a great opportunity for us to share a little bit of some of the work we did. So I prepared a presentation to get us started. So let me share my screen so that you can see it. Okay, here we go. And here we are. I will also make this available for anyone who wants it afterwards. So the title I came up with to get us started discussing these issues is Transformative Dialogues, just like Kiki said, student voice as a catalyst for educational inclusion and pedagogical innovation. We see this as a great opportunity to try and go further with the transformation of the practices and the curriculum approaches we are currently using in schools. And more than just exploring student voice, we want to see it as something that can be transformative. So the agenda for today is pretty straightforward. I'll try to talk for no more than 20 minutes. Let me get here my clock. I will do a short introduction to student voice just to get us all in a similar page at least, so that we can have a shared understanding of some of the ideas I'll be discussing. Then I'll go with 3 examples from past research we did that we've developed into vignettes that illustrate 3 different uses, approaches behind student voice. And then I'll go further from there into possible avenues for discussion, implications for some of the issues that are raised by these ways of looking, experiencing student voice. And then, as Kiki was sharing, we will separate into small groups so that everyone can discuss their own perspective. Ideas. I've prepared some discussion questions, but you will be free to deviate from those as you see fit. So, first, to get started, when we talk about student voice, I went and I collected the definition we used in the article that we suggested as a prior reading for those who wanted to learn a little bit more about it. And also the vignettes that I will talk about also come from this article. So in this article, we define student voice as the active participation of students in shaping their learning environments and also their educational experiences. And here we emphasize the way we recognize students as valuable contributors to decision-making processes that can affect their schooling and overall their educational outcomes. This approach tries to position students not just as recipients of education, but as critical stakeholders whose insights, whose opinions can significantly impact and improve the educational practices, particularly in multicultural settings like the ones we were researching and we've been researching for the last few years here in Lisbon. As conceptual foundations for this work, we have 3 main ideas here. The idea of empowerment and agency, this recognition that student voice initiatives are grounded in this belief that students should have agency over their own learning and have a say in matters that affect them in their school environment, and also that this empowers students, fostering in them this sense of responsibility and ownership over their own educational journey. The second one is the idea of democracy in education. So these are not recent ideas. We see this in the UN documents from the 60s and 50s. This recognition that we should incorporate student voice, aligning with democratic principles of education, promoting participatory practices that involve students in decisions that influence their own academic and social development. And final, we advocate for pedagogical partnerships, using student voice as a way to promote partnerships where teachers and students collaborate, and challenging traditional hierarchies in classrooms and in schools. I think it's more democratic approach. The main theoretical perspectives we use to develop this are constructivist learning. From a constructivist perspective, we involve students in their own learning processes, trying to help them in constructing their own knowledge through interaction, through reflection, and through making learning more relevant to their context and more effective to address their own learning needs. And on the other hand, we're also inspired by critical pedagogy from Paulo Freire and other critical pedagogues who argue for the importance of empowering students to challenge and transform their own oppressive structures within educational systems. So we see student voice as a critical tool for fostering this critical consciousness among the students themselves. The main relevance and benefits that we see from this type of work come from this enhanced engagement and motivation that we can have within the students, making them feel that their opinions are valued, that they have a role in shaping their education, and that their engagement and motivation to learn generally increase. On the other hand, we also see this as a way to improve school climate and relationships, making schools embrace student voice, often reporting a more positive school climate and stronger relationships between students and staff, and also as a mutual respect and undergoing growth. Thirdly, here, we also see this as a way to promote educational reforms and innovations, making student contributions that can lead to practical innovations in teaching and curriculum design, as students often provide unique insights into how educational practices can be improved and can be a great source of inspiration. And final, we also see this as a great tool to promote social and emotional development, engaging with student voices, helping them in their social and emotional development, and as they learn to express themselves, to negotiate, to communicate, to engage in dialogue with their own peers, but also with the other adults who are present. Of course, we also see some challenges when we try to work around these concepts. The first one is the idea of equity and inclusivity when we think about student voice. A major challenge here is to ensure that student voice initiatives are inclusive and represent the diverse student body, including those who come from marginalized or minority backgrounds, who may have more difficulty having their own voices heard within the school context. The second challenge is the problem of adult skepticism and structural barriers to student voice. There are clearly skepticism from some educators and some structural barriers within the school systems that limit the effective implementation of student voice, and this should be addressed, should be recognized so that it can be transformed. And the final challenge that I enumerate here is the idea of tokenism, this recognition that there is a risk that student voice can become tokenistic, where students are seemingly involved, but their input has little real impact on the decision-making process. So we make them heard, but we don't do much with what they are doing with the participation that they're actually having. Finally, to finish this first part, there are also some emerging trends that we recognize in the way student voice is being promoted and used. The first one is the defense for more personalized and co-created learning environments, shifting towards this type of experiences where students have a say in their own learning paths, in the curriculum design, even in the assessment methods. And this co-creation process involves students collaborating with educators, even to develop educational materials and learning activities. The second one here is the idea of equity and inclusive initiatives, recognizing that developing initiatives to include voices of students from marginalized and underrepresented groups can ensure more diverse perspectives that can be heard, that can be valued, and this way we can foster a more inclusive school culture. The third here is the idea of integration in policy and decision-making, trying to go even a step further, including student representatives in school boards, in councils, and other decision-making bodies to ensure that the policies and the practices reflect their needs and their perspectives. And the final one, a final emerging trend here, is the development of digital platforms for engagement, being recognized by some authors that utilizing digital tools and platforms can amplify student voices, can allow less heard voices to actually be transparently engaged, and can enable a broader and more inclusive participation through online surveys, social media, tools that we can use inside the classroom or virtual forums. Okay, so given this initial setup, I will share with you some of the insights we got from this research that I did with a former doctoral student, Nicolette Zelay, and another colleague here from the University of Lisbon, and Ana Sofia Pinho, that we called Rethinking Cultural Activities, and an examination of how teachers utilize student voice as a pedagogical tool in multicultural classrooms. To, for you to understand where we are coming from, in this research, there was one main research question, looking into how teachers use student voices as pedagogical tools. And the context was in a migratory region in Portugal, here in Lisbon, a school cluster with a lot of multicultural students engaged there. It included 6 schools in total, 5 primary and 1 secondary, with students from many different nationalities, 32 in total, 3/4 of them more or less Portuguese, where we did an embedded case study with 32 school practitioners doing mainly document analysis, semi-structured interviews, and classroom observations. So what did we learn from this using the vignette approach? And here I will comment on three what we called representative vignettes of the approaches that were being used around student voice in this school cluster. First one, there's this episode from Marisa. Marisa is a preschool teacher, educator, and this episode illustrates how a teacher, even with good intentions to embrace cultural diversity, might have still unconsciously contributed to students' misrepresentation using fixed cultural facts without student voice work actually being implemented. So she has good intentions, but she falls short of actually developing the student's voice in this episode. This episode portrays a preschool activity with kids ages 3 to 5. And this class is an example of a very multicultural classroom where diverse migration patterns, histories, languages intersect with students from Portugal, Brazil, Cape Verde, Nepal, India, and many other places. Here, the children who are yet not proficient in Portuguese, and the teacher often uses English to speak with them. And in her practice, Marisa aims to promote children's self-expression, opinions, and thoughts, and try to use multimodal self-portraits to describe and display them. She uses photos, she uses drawings, and other artwork to represent the children's activities. But as we can see in this episode, everything is very much led by the teacher herself, the educator. In this case, Marisa call them educators in preschool in Portugal. We see that most of the verbs in this episode refer to the things that she is trying to engage the students in participating with, but she is leading the activity. The students are just participating occasionally in the activity that she's leading, in this case, an activity about the Portuguese flag and the flags from their own home countries and how they are represented within the classroom. Another step when we try to include these ideas of student voice is from the episode that we represented here from Paula. Paula is a first grade teacher. And in this episode, we can see this personalized approach that she's using in her primary school first grade classroom. Paula, the teacher, does not believe in more folkloristic activities, like we could see, for example, in the example from Marisa, and sees cultural diversity as a part of all diversities that students represent. In his activity, traditionally described as show and tell, which is usually held after the main lesson in the morning and before recess, the children sit on the floor in a circle, and Paula sits with them on a chair. Very traditional, type of activity that can be seen in many schools. The difference here is that Paula calls on the students one by one and asks them if they have something to tell, to read, to show to the whole class, engaging them from whatever they want to share. The children are free to share whatever they want. And the vignette features several kids. In this case, X, for example, is a kid from Nepal, who is still not mastering Portuguese language very well and doesn't feel comfortable sharing at the moment. Y, a recently arrived refugee boy from Iraq, who is not yet proficient in Portuguese, but who wants to share and has the opportunity to do so. And Z, a dual citizen and bilingual speaker of Italian and Portuguese, who also wants to share his own perspective about the activity that was developed. And the last vignette is an illustration also from the same school cluster, but from a secondary school, so older kids, 15 through 18. This is in the 15 to 16 class. And this is a case that happens as a result of a situation where teachers intervened because students were name calling each other, and teachers were pointing out the fallacy behind such terms as skin color in terms of scolding or teacher-led conversations. A few responses here seem to develop projects with active student participation to tackle discrimination and racism. The teacher here promoted a narrative on this type of activity. The teacher aimed at engaging the students in making and performing of a drama play on the chosen topic of racism, involving the students in transforming the reality that they depicted. This activity was an elective drama course in the secondary school, and the students voluntarily subscribed for this module and participate. It's quite different in the way it's being done here, because they are the ones doing it. They are the ones selecting what to do and how to do it. They decided to make an inquiry, like a questionnaire to all the classes to get the feeling of how their colleagues were perceiving this issue. Then they themselves treated the data from that questionnaire, and they created a play in this theater simulation. Not simulation, they actually did a play to address this issue and to represent this issue. In this activity, interrogating racism in the school, some of the core elements of student voice can be identified. Students can be seen as co-researchers. They develop student inquiries about racism in their school before they enact the drama play. And they are also creators of knowledge, analyzing and interpreting data, writing the play, and acting it out. So, what avenues for further exploration do we see that can be taken forward from the examples we've seen in this research? The first one are strategies to facilitate student voice. And here 4 have emerged. The first one is the idea of creating inclusive environments. So this idea of facilitating and fostering teachers that promote student voice by creating inclusive, safe classroom environments where all students are valued, where they are respected in spite of their cultural, ethnic, or social backgrounds. And this involves active combating biases and stereotypes and promoting respect for diversity. Promoting engagement and participation, making the teachers here play a direct role in encouraging all students to engage and participate in classroom discussions and activities. Developing responsive pedagogies that adapt to the cultural and individual needs of the students and then can promote student voice, and empowering students as decision makers in such a way that they take on roles of decision making in aspects of school life that affect them. However, we also recognize that there are some hindering problems that should be addressed when we address student voice and we try to promote student voice. The first one that we see here is very prescriptive teaching, like we saw in the first example of Marisa, a very rigid, prescriptive approach that limits the opportunities for students to interact and to give us feedback, and this can hinder their voice. A lack of cultural competence on some of the teachers that did not have the opportunity and intention to think about this, to learn about this, and often even unintentionally silence or marginalize some students from diverse backgrounds. And the final one is the recognition of some inadequate structures for participation, recognizing that there's a lack here that should be addressed in curriculum design, in school governance, because this can hinder student voice and participation. And the final avenue here are challenges for teacher education and professional development. There's a recognition that there should be more training in critical multiculturalism, very much in the case of these school clusters that we've studied here in Portugal. where professional development and teacher education need to address this issue. The need to develop further empowering pedagogies. Teachers require training in this to promote student voice, learning about how to facilitate discussions, integrate student-led activities, develop curricula that reflects this, and also continuous professional development that they often ask for more. This is very recurrent here in the Portuguese case. And the final one here is to develop good feedback mechanisms that teachers can benefit to allow them to hear directly from the students about their classroom experiences. And this feedback can then guide them in adjusting their practices to better accommodate and promote student voice. So finishing up, we try to reach this idea of student voice as a dynamic and evolving concept within the educational research that is recognized as crucial for democratization of education and the enhancement of the learning environments. And also for its effective implementation, we require careful consideration of inclusivity and impact, ensuring that all students have the opportunity to contribute meaningfully to their educational experiences. The role of teachers here, either facilitating or hindering student voice, is very much determined largely by their ability to create respectful, inclusive, responsive learning environments. So we see this as one of the main challenges. And I finish here, thanking you for this initial introduction, and I leave you with the discussion questions for the small group discussion. So I created for you to reflect on, but you are free to look elsewhere, whatever this initial presentation raised in your awareness about this issue. The first one is, what methodological approaches are most effective for studying the impact of student voice on educational outcomes in diverse classrooms? Discuss the complexities of researching student voice, methodologies used, ethical consideration, challenges of capturing authentic student perspectives. The second one is, considering the challenges of tokenism and genuine engagement, what criteria can we use to evaluate the authenticity of student voice? And here we can discuss how to critically assess whether student voice initiatives are generally empowering them or merely serving as symbolic gestures. This can also lead to discussions about what kind of indicators do we want to use to successfully identify student voice integration. And the final one is, how do socio-political contexts influence the implementation and effectiveness of student voice in schools? And this can make us think about how different educational systems and cultural norms impact the practice of student voice, how global perspectives and the social political factors can facilitate or hinder student participation in educational decisions. So our suggestion here is now to break out into small groups, and we have 17 participants at the moment. So I'll make 5 small groups, and we will discuss these issues or any others you find relevant within those small groups. And then we can come back as a whole group to share what was the main ideas that emerged from each of the groups. And in the meantime, I'll check out also what you left on the chat. Okay? So let me stop.
Luis, before it's Elizabeth, before you send us off to the rooms, which is going to be a great and rich conversation, I just want to thank you for opening up the conversation in a way that we can see both the diversity of methodologies, but also the complexity of the challenges that we face in people's understanding of what student voice actually is, and the pedagogical ramifications of that to put it into practice, and also the heightened need for the institutions that support education to create the opportunities for teachers to take lead with their students in moving into that student voice space. So you gave us a lot of food for thought, and we're looking forward to the conversations that we have next. Thank you.